In this video, I'll be sharing with you how to make a nutritious, delicious snack: cold smoked salmon jerky. Now this is going to be one of those videos that goes well over the usual 3 minutes or so, but I hope you don't mind. This video is brought to you by the Hunting for God, Fishing for the Lord series of books. Come along on an unforgettable adventure for the soul. Learn more and order your copies today at Amazon.com by clicking on the link in the video description below or by visiting 3minutesoutdoors.com. If you're a subscriber to this channel and enjoy all the fishing videos that I produce, then it's probably no surprise when I tell you that I thankfully have an abundance of salmon in my freezer each year, caught from the pristine waters of Kodiak Island, Alaska. Salmon is a primary staple of nutrition for my family, and as I've shared in some of my salmon recipe videos, we prepare it in many different ways. As much as we love catching and cooking salmon though, I have to tell you, when you eat it several times a week, year after year, one has to get a little creative with it so as not to get burned out. One particular method of preparing salmon that I never get tired of though is cold smoked salmon jerky. To begin, cold smoking is a bit different from the more common method of hot smoking. Most of the smokers that you see sold at outdoor stores are for hot smoking, which essentially is a method of flavoring and cooking the fish or meat at a low temperature for many hours. Cold smoking, on the other hand, is likewise a way of flavoring fish or meat, but it's more a matter of drying and preserving it instead of slowly cooking it. Cold smoking can take several days to even several weeks, and it's done by first curing the fish or meat in a brine, smoking it at a very low temperature, and then letting it air dry, similar to what you see Alaskan natives doing with their catch each year. Again, there are many different ways to cold smoke food items, and this is just one tried and true method that produces great results. Now, I decided not to do a complete step-by-step overview of how to build a cold smoker for this video, as it's really pretty simple. All you need is a drying rack of some kind, a bug-proof, screened-in box for the rack, and a covering or enclosure to put the whole thing in while smoking. I found a small, handy-dandy stainless steel utility rack at Walmart that was perfect for the actual rack part of the smoker, and then I built a big screen box to put the rack in. Simple as that. As you can see here, I have a couple of doors on my box for easy access to the fish or meat, and I sealed the whole thing up very securely with weather stripping. For the smoking process, I built a take-down plywood enclosure that goes around the box that I can easily store when not in use. Now, as a side note, plywood is not recommended for hot smoking, as it may produce an off flavor. However, since cold smoking is done at such a low temperature, it really isn't an issue. The only other thing you'll need is a small pan or pot to put a few pieces of charcoal in, to burn some wood to make your smoke, and you're all set. Once your cold smoker is ready to go, the next step is to cut and brine your fish. Now, while I'm making salmon jerky in this video, you can use this same recipe and process for making fish jerky of any kind. Halibut, for example, also works nicely. In this example, I'm using pink salmon. Now, the fillets of pink salmon are not all that thick, so I'm leaving the skin on and cutting them into 1/2 to inch wide strips. For thicker fillets, I'll cut the strips at about 1/4 inch thick. Whatever the case, try to keep your strips of a uniform size and thickness so they all dry out evenly together. Next, you'll want to make your brine. Putting fish or meat in either a liquid or a dry brine before smoking helps to remove any remaining blood and moisture from the fish, as well as acting as a natural flavor-enhancing preservative. While every salmon smoking enthusiast in the world seems to have their own unique brine recipe, the two main ingredients in all of them is brown sugar and salt. Now, you can do a search on the internet and come up with all kinds of interesting recipes, but to keep it simple, I'm mixing 2 pounds of brown sugar, which is your standard size package at the store, with 1/4 cup of salt. If you want to make a liquid brine to soak your fish in, just mix the sugar and salt in a bucket or large pot with a gallon or two of water and chuck your fish strips in it. As you can see here though, I'm using a dry brine. So I simply put a layer of fish strips in a big container, cover it completely with the brine mixture, add another layer of fish strips, cover that with brine, and so on and so forth. No matter if you use a liquid or a dry brine though, make sure your fish is totally covered or immersed and leave it in the brine for several hours or overnight. After your fish is good and brined, rinse it off thoroughly, place it on your smoking rack, and let it air dry for a few hours until the surface gets what's known as a pellicle, which is a dry, tacky outer surface on the fish. I also lightly sprinkle black pepper on my fish at this point, which is simply a matter of taste. To expedite the pellicle formation, you can use a fan of one kind or another, as I'm doing here. After a good pellicle has formed on the surface of the fish, it's time to smoke it. Again, the point of cold smoking is not so much about slowly cooking the fish as done when hot smoking, but more so as a means of flavoring and drying out the fish. As cold smoking is done at a very low temperature, I put just a few charcoal briquettes in a small pot, and when they're ready to go, I put a handful of wood chips on top and start smoking away. Traditionally, fruit woods are used when smoking fish and poultry, as it produces a nice sweet flavor. So here I'm using a combination of apple and cherry. Alder wood also gives fish a very nice flavor, and it's quite traditional in Alaska as there's no shortage of it. I smoke my fish for about 4 hours or so, as that's really all it takes to give it a nice smoky flavor. And then I transfer my rack to the screened-in enclosure for the drying process. The drying process will be affected by things such as the temperature and humidity, but it typically takes several days to dry out a batch of salmon jerky. Now you'll want to keep your drying rack in a well-ventilated place, out of direct sunlight, and in a place where fish-eating critters will not have easy access to it. As old Yukon loves smoked salmon just as much or even more than I do, I put my drying rack up on a little utility workbench to keep him from getting tempted or messing around with it too much. You'll want to dry out your fish until it all has a jerky-like texture and consistency to it, not too soft and not too chewy, which is simply a matter of sampling a piece or two while it's in the drying process. After you do a batch or two of smoked salmon jerky, you'll get an idea of how many days it takes to dry out your fish and how it should look and feel when it's ready to go. Again, for this example though, the average daily temperature at the time that I shot this video was 75 to 80 degrees, and it took about 4 days to finish and completely dry out a batch of jerky. So when your jerky is ready to go, just take it off the rack, peel off the skin before you eat it, which also makes a healthy treat for your pet, and enjoy. You can immediately share it with family and friends, or package some up with a vacuum sealer and throw it in the freezer for later. On a final note, you can also make venison or beef jerky using a very similar method to this one, which I'll be sharing in a future video, so stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this channel. And check out the 3 Minutes Outdoors website at 3minutesoutdoors.com. And finally, if you'd like to support this channel, click on the link in the video description below to find out more.